Welcome back, everyone, to a special series I'm thrilled to be hosting on LinkedIn called The Entrepreneur's Chair. Throughout this series, my goal is to provide authentic and intimate conversations with trailblazing entrepreneurs that are reshaping the Austin business scene. From startup founders to seasoned business moguls, we'll dive deep into the triumphs, the challenges, and the pivotal moments that shaped who they are as an entrepreneur. I am so thrilled to have with us today Pooja Patel, an accomplished epidemiologist and biotech go-to-market leader. With 2 degrees from Columbia University and a proven track record at Pfizer and venture-backed startups, Pooja brings a rare blend of healthcare expertise and commercial strategy to the table. She now leads Synvect, where she is driving go-to-market execution and building a powerful global customer network. Beyond her business achievements, Pooja is deeply committed to improving public health, with a particular focus on tackling the urgent mosquito problem. Welcome, Pooja.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to get into it.
Oh, glad you're here. So, I've been looking forward to this conversation. You have such a wide-ranging and exciting background. You've got public health, you've got biotech, you have huge company experience with Pfizer, you've got more of the entrepreneurial, smaller company with Synvect now. What drew you to really take on an entrepreneurial role on the side of healthcare innovation?
Of course. Yeah. During my time at Pfizer, you get to see a lot about how the world works. You get to see so many different therapeutic areas, how different drugs and access to drugs can really impact the health of a community. And it was so impactful to be able to see that across so many different sectors. But being the kind of the builder that I am, I was really passionate about tangibly seeing each of those pieces through. Right. And so moved into the venture-backed startup space to be able to have more agency in seeing through a lot of those innovations. When you're working at a big corporation, you see sometimes how slowly things can move and how awesome it can be to move in a much more expedited pace in innovation. Right. And so that really drew me to startups, and particularly vector-borne disease, given my epidemiology background.
Right.
Wanted to be able to serve a large impact while also getting after literally one of humankind's biggest issues since the dawn of humanity.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm always curious, why epidemiology? What drew you to that?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in a household of doctors, essentially. So healthcare has always been a part of how I grew up, whether that was going to be me working in an individual healthcare capacity, being a doctor, or a public health kind of innovator was always kind of the question in my mind. As I was growing up, it just seemed really, really valuable to be able to impact whole communities. As a doctor, you can impact individual lives, which is so important. It's an integral part of the public health system. But how can we make it such that communities don't need to go to the doctor and are living healthier at that public health level to prevent needing that individual care in the first place?
I love that. What a way to leverage expertise.
Yeah, right. And so you're making that funnel. All parts are super important, but you want to create a preventative mechanism, essentially.
That's beautiful. And you've built your career in the intersection of science and business. And that's an interesting line to walk, right? So how has your background as an epidemiologist shaped the way you approach your go-to-market strategies in the biotech space?
Absolutely. I think in a lot of ways, I see my role as a conduit between scientific rigor and commercial viability. And I think in the biotech space, particularly in the early stage startup of a biotech, you need to expand your definition of what success means beyond just the science, right? So most scientific founders will say, okay, the innovation, the technology is effective. That's all I need. Everyone is going to buy it if it's effective. And unfortunately, that's not always the case, right? So the next step is market alignment. And so broadening your definition to include, do people want this? Will they buy it? Is the next check mark of success in my mind. And a lot of founders will do that. And then the last section, and I think this one is the hardest to do and the most overlooked, is, okay, your technology works, people want it, but is it scalable and accessible? And that's where a lot of biotech, especially early stage biotechs, will get caught up. Because if you have this super expensive mechanism and tool, but you can't really scale it at the public health level, then you're always going to hit a wall as far as growth goes, right? And so making sure that as a founder and that at Synvect, we're taking into account all three of those as we are building is what I think is going to lead to success.
No, I think especially as founding in that type of entrepreneurial environment, knowing those other two factors. A lot of founders I talk to, they don't get it. So congratulations on that. That's a wonderful business acumen that you bring to the space. So one thing that really stands out to me, and we talked about even beginning at this, was your commitment to public health, and particularly around solving the real massive problem with the mosquito problem. Can you share about why this resonates so strongly with you personally? And I mean, you've turned that into something significant in your business.
Of course. Yeah. So, I mean, my family is originally from India. My parents emigrated here in the 80s, and we'd sporadically go back to India probably every couple of years growing up. And the way my parents were always so worried that we were going to get dengue or malaria really resonated with me, because that is the reality for many people globally across the world. And unfortunately, now, because of pesticide resistance, because of global warming, many of those issues are becoming relevant to us here in the States.
Sure.
Right? There have been locally transmitted cases of dengue in Texas as of last year, in Florida and California. And so it's not only an emerging problem, it's one that's on our doorstep, right? And so to be able to, take something that has been so pivotal in my childhood, right, and be able to solve for multiple types of different situations, whether that be in your backyard or in the Gambia, where we're also doing pilots, has been really, really cool to see.
And it was interesting because I've traveled a lot, and I, of course, took the malaria.
Big malaria, impossible to swallow.
And the nightmares I had, it just really...
The side effects are horrible.
Yeah. So what is it about y'all's approach with going attacking these mosquitoes? It's different than anything else that's been done in the world today.
Totally, right? There are a couple of different bodies of solutions, right? So you have like personal protective solutions like bed nets or bug sprays or those candles that you might use. And all of those are moderately effective, right? But they're just really not viable as a public health solution. Right. As a community organizer, you're not going to buy a candle for every single household and call it a day, right? It's one, not economical, and two, it's not worth the investment because of how moderate it is, right? And so for a long time, academics and historians have really known that getting after vector-borne disease and mosquito-borne disease at the public health level is the most effective. And that's why pesticides have worked so well historically, right? After World War II, we indiscriminately sprayed pesticides across all of the US and eradicated dengue and malaria. And it worked super well for decades, right? Up until recently. Mosquitoes evolved really quickly, and they've now evolved to not be harmed by toxic chemicals. So all those pesticides are just harming the environment and us, but not the mosquitoes, right? And so in our thinking, we wanted to develop a solution that's viable not only for your backyard, but also at the public health level. And so what we've developed are these tiny mosquito eggs that can be deployed in little pods in your backyard or at the county level. You simply add water to the pod, and what emerges is super cool. So these eggs emerge into sterile, non-biting mosquitoes. that will then mate with the local biting bad population. And since one parent in that equation is sterile, you're essentially using their own biological process to really elegantly eradicate them. And then every month you'll replace the pod just to maintain that suppression. But you're not using any chemicals, you're just using biology, essentially.
That is fascinating. I love that approach.
Yeah, it sounds super wild, but once you kind of get through the mechanics of it, it makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, sign me up. I was one of those kids. I'm going to date myself a little bit, but you talked about it. In the growing up, the spray truck would come through
fog
town.
Machines, yeah,
and
totally.
we would ride our bicycle behind them. It's like, oh, we're in the fog. And I'm like, there's no telling what kind of things I've got in my body from doing that, but that really happened, folks. Okay, so you have worked in incredibly successful large corporations, nimble startups. You talked about the ability to take something to fruition and and take it all that way. For leaders that are trying to make that evolution, what lessons have you learned on how to adapt from kind of that big company environment to the nimble startup?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is humility.
Okay.
So insofar as that you really have to do everything, right? Like you have to have conversations like this, you have to talk to investors, and then literally right after this, I'm about to go change into athletic wear and go into the field and collect mosquitoes. So you have to be able to do both and willing to do both and enjoy it, especially at the beginning stages. You can't be too good for certain types of work, right? And it's really important to have your finger on the pulse of the technology itself. I think that's my biggest thing. You see a lot of, especially like healthcare executives go into startup spaces and be alarmed by how much they actually have to physically do themselves.
Right.
Right. So that's my biggest piece of advice is to get comfortable with doing it all.
Yeah, and understanding whether you can.
Yes.
I had the same experience, some large company exec coming into my startup. I learned that lesson once. And just, the resources weren't there to support.
Right.
So there was a little bit.
You're booking all your own meetings, friends.
Collecting your own mosquitoes. Okay, so being a woman in biotech leadership, I'm sure it comes with its own set of challenges and wins too. So when you think about your journey so far, what were some moments that made you feel proud for just paving the way for others?
Yeah, I think it's more so a million little things like this, right? That allow for you to connect with other women that have been either in hard tech or in entrepreneurship in general, right? I think each of those conversations has a lot of value at the personal level and the broader impact level as well. One of my biggest learnings of being a woman in the entrepreneurial space is really just to make your voice your own. For a long time, I thought that I needed to fit into this archetype of what a Fortune 500 CEO looked like, right?
Sure.
And that's often really white and really male, right? And I come off a little bit differently. I make a lot of jokes. I am talking about my technology in somewhat of a different way. And that has worked out for me much more than trying to fit myself into a box that just isn't me. And of course, not everyone's going to like the box that I put myself in, and that's okay.
Yeah, just
at least
being
it's an authentic one.
Yeah, I that was a word that just came up as you were speaking. Just letting that authentic who we are out there, and that's who we are, and that's how we can be most impactful. So I love hearing that.
Totally.
Did you have mentors growing up or any time in your career, somebody that just made a huge difference in your life?
Yeah, I mean, so many. I think one of my biggest mentors early on was like my high school speech and debate coach.
Yeah.
I think it really taught me like the power of really telling a really awesome story. And especially being in STEM fields primarily early on in my career in academia, it's so valuable to be able to talk about your technology in a way that people can understand and that can resonate with them. And then especially on the fundraising side for entrepreneurship,
Yes.
being able to communicate the impact of your technology over years is super key. So that he was a big influence. And then both of my parents also have just been huge big aspects of why I feel like I've been able to do something like this. I always say, and we've talked about this before, but I always say that I was raised by a dreamer and a realist. And so that combination has allowed for me to take calculated risks, like starting a company, while being mindful of the reality of the situation, right? That there's a lot of work that goes into it, that you have to be really humble, etc. Yeah.
Okay, which of your parents was the dreamer?
Yeah, my dad's the dreamer.
Okay.
And my mom's the realist.
That's brilliant. And if you don't mind me asking just a few more questions,
Yeah.
part of, for the success of your company, fundraising is just critical. What has that, how did you learn how to do that? What have been some of the experiences? What would you share with a first-time entrepreneur that they don't even know what it looks like to raise funds? So how did you work through all of that?
A lot of trial and error.
Okay.
We probably had over 100 investor meetings.
Okay.
And the beginning aspects of that are so important because you're really refining how you're telling your story, right? And that really includes starting from a really first principles approach. What is the market you're trying to address? Why? How is your technology impacting that? And you just start to get better at telling that story over time. I think one of my biggest pieces of advice is to have those conversations super early so that you can get good at it for when it's really important, right?
Yep.
And so when you have these really key investor conversations, maybe put those off until you've refined that story with a different audience first in order to make sure it's really hitting in the way that you think. Especially for scientists like myself, you think that people know all these nuances.
Right.
And you realize that it's just a you thing. And so you have to be able to think, oh, okay, so people don't actually know this about mosquito control, right? And you have to educate them on that.
And then how to say it simple enough to get that point across without being too scientific, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was first doing my first fundraising, I can remember in the first meetings, just all the questions they asked that I didn't know the answer and being able to say, I don't know the answer yet. And then each time getting better and better till when you get to that perfect funding meeting.
It all just comes together.
Yeah. And I'm sure with 100 kind of meetings, you got to that expertise.
Yeah, totally. And with this fundraising environment too, it's just, you got to keep your top of funnel extremely wide.
Yeah, that's great. So I like to end each of the episodes with a couple of questions. One is, what do you feel like authentically makes for a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think that the biggest things I've touched on a little bit, but is humility, right? Just being able to take your wins and move on from your losses, admit when things didn't maybe go so well, and double down when things do, right? I think one of the biggest things is also agility. So being a flexible worker, you're going to be doing a lot of different types of work, and you have to be able to understand when to give that piece of work to someone else and when to prioritize what work is yours. At the end of the day, I think what's most important is that you're authentic to yourself and to what's best for the company, and making sure your ego stays out of it.
Well said. Well said. And then how do you define success as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think success comes down to giving it at your all, right? For me, entrepreneurship in many ways, you're set up to fail, right? You're going against all odds, and most likely your startup is not going to become a Fortune 500 company. It's probably not going to IPO. And that is okay, right? I think being okay with it not working is one of the biggest learnings that I've had from this, right? I've just found so much value in the network I've been able to build, the people that we've already been able to help, and so much of what I've learned from just building itself. And that is something I'll take with me for the rest of my life.
I love that. Pooja, thank you so much for coming on today. And I cannot wait to track your company and, of course, yourself. And what you're doing is going to make a change, but a big dent in illness in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.